Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here today.
Meg, I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be great.
Yes, well, I have not talked about bone health at all yet. So I'm excited to give this information because it affects everyone. So before we get started, can you tell us just a little bit about how you got into this, how you became the bone coach?
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, I would say, like a lot of us in the health space, we have our own health journeys that bring us here. And we want to take the lessons that we learn from that and help other people. And that was no different for me. And I would say my health journey started when I was a lot younger. When my mother was 5 months pregnant with me, my father was told he had cancer. And 2 months after I was born, he passed away. And he was 35 years old at that time. And my entire life, I had this fear that I was going to follow in his footsteps to an early grave and not be there for my kids and experience the joys of being a father. And when I had actually gone into the Marine Corps to follow in his footsteps. And when I came out of the Marine Corps, I had a lot of different health issues that came up. I had high stress, poor sleep, uh, chronic digestive issues. I was diagnosed with celiac disease. So I was malabsorbing nutrients for many, many years. For those who don't know, celiac disease, autoimmune condition that damages the villi, the nutrient absorption centers in your small intestine, and blunts them. And my villi, my roots were effectively damaged, and my body still needed these nutrients to execute its daily functions. So where did it go to get the nutrients? Went to my bones, and it started pulling these nutrients from my bones, the largest mineral reserves we have. And then I was subsequently diagnosed with osteoporosis right around my early 30s. And, right at that time, it was like I had a young daughter, son on the way, and I felt like I was going down the same path as my father to an early grave. And I was living a nightmare. And I realized I had to figure things out. That was my impetus for figuring these things out. And I started doing the reading, the research, consulting with people, spent a lot of money trying to figure this stuff out. And I finally got the right plan in place. And I was improving my health and doing all these amazing things. And I was like, you know what? It is not the average 30-year-old male who's dealing with osteoporosis. It's the woman 50 to 65 plus, or, somewhere around there, 40, something like that, that gets diagnosed and they're told, take some calcium, some vitamin D, go for a walk. Here's your bone medication. We'll see you next year for your next bone density scan. That is not enough. That's woefully inadequate. And that is the reason why I became a coach. I became bone coach. I became a certified health coach. I built out a team of credentialed experts. We've got over 150,000 people in our community at this point. Over 5,000 people have come through our programs, and it's just been an amazing journey to really help and serve other people that need the guidance.
Yeah, well, that's great. One of the things that you mentioned in your journey, and I think can be surprising for a lot of people, is that here you were, young 30s, a male, and I think we do just think of, oh, we're not going to have to worry about bones until we're older, and I think that's kind of a misconception. So, could you talk to us a little bit about someone who's even younger or just not suspecting that they could be in this place where they're really having to consider their bone health?
Absolutely, because right, it can happen at a younger age. You can have issues with your bone health. You could be losing bone from at a younger age. And I think it's important to distinguish first what osteoporosis is. It's porous bone, right? When you have osteoporosis, it's porous bone, and when you have bones that are less dense, they have lowered strength. That's going to increase your fracture risk, and that's going to lead to a whole host of other issues later on in life. So if we understand that's what osteoporosis is, we need to then understand there are different types of osteoporosis. There's primary osteoporosis, which is typically related to a decrease in estrogen in postmenopausal women. Estrogen has a protective effect on bone. As estrogen levels decrease, as they do during menopause, that's going to cause an increase in the activity level of cells that break down bone. But then there's a whole nother cause of osteoporosis, and that's called secondary osteoporosis. This is the category I fell into. And this is where you develop osteoporosis as a result of behaviors, disorders, diseases, conditions, medications. And an important thing we have to understand is if you are a postmenopausal woman, you can't just make the assumption that there's not a secondary cause. And we also can't just accept that it's just hormones or it's just a natural part of aging, because there's usually more to it than that that has to be explored. So we don't want to make assumptions. We want to make objective decisions. And then the other thing we need to realize is that um, you may not, when you get what's called a bone density scan, that is what helps you understand the status of your bone health, or at least part of your bone health. It tells you what your bone density is. But it won't tell you is, are you still actively losing bone right now, present day? There is a test called the serum CTX test, which is it's a blood marker, and it's a bone turnover marker, and it looks at the activity level of cells that are breaking down bone. And if that activity level is elevated or even really high, that can be an indicator that you have active bone loss and a root cause issue that needs to be addressed. But we also need to understand is that it could be something that happened, or a combination of things that happen in your younger years as well. So up to 90% of your bone mass is put on by the time you turn age 18. And by the time you turn 30, the remaining 10% approximately fills in. So if when you were younger, you had poor diet and nutrition, you weren't getting enough calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, vitamin K2, you ate a bunch of sugary candy and drank a bunch of sugary soft drinks, if you led a sedentary lifestyle, if you weren't doing gymnastics or playing sports, or if you just sat on the couch all the time, or you maybe had an injury that kept you in bed rest for a long period of time. Maybe it was certain medications that you took in your younger years, glucocorticoid medications like prednisone. If you had an eating disorder, if you smoked or drank excessively, all of these things could have prevented you from achieving peak bone mass and starting with what I call a full bucket. And if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, yeah, some of those things apply to me, but you also have kids and grandkids or things like that right now, this is why it's so important to focus on helping your kids make the best possible decisions from a young age, because you are helping set up right now their futures decades from now.
Yeah, that's really important. And, it's interesting because you were bringing up, I just want to clear up a misconception I often see when it comes to bone health. And that is the calcium issue because everyone's taught, we have everyone pushing calcium. A lot of people come to me and they're like, oh, my doctor just told me to take these high doses of calcium, which we know aren't always good to take calcium, especially not if you're having other nutrients that support the absorption of calcium into the bone. So do you want to talk to that a little bit? Because I think that's something that people are often just misguided a little bit on, just take calcium alone.
Yeah, so many people get told just take calcium. And look, calcium is important, right? It is the primary mineral constituent of your bones. So, yes, it is important, but it's not the only nutrient. Vitamin D is very important. Vitamin D is actually one of the most important nutrients, not just for your overall health and well-being, but also for your bone health. So that's important. Part of the reason is that it actually helps increase the intestinal absorption of calcium. It helps reduce the urinary excretion of calcium. It's going to promote higher bone mineral density. It's going to help slow bone loss, and it's going to help a lot of other areas too. So vitamin D is really important. A lot of times, if people are in those colder weather months, right? If the sun's rays aren't strong enough to generate enough vitamin D production, your best source of vitamin D is usually the sun. But if you're in those colder weather months, those are the situations where supplementation is probably going to be helpful. But before you start supplementing with vitamin D, you need to get your levels checked, right? You need to understand where you're at. And then once you start, and you would get a 25 hydroxy vitamin D test. And then once you start supplementing with vitamin D, you would measure your levels 3 to 6 months later, see where they're at, see if the supplement you're taking is actually working. See if you maybe have an issue. Maybe the supplement works, but you have an issue with conversion, right? So there are multiple things that could take place there, but vitamin D on the whole is very important. Another important nutrient is vitamin K. So K1 and K2. K1 would be, this would be like coming from your dark green veggies, your asparagus, your kale, your broccoli, those kinds of things. K2 would be like there are different forms of K2. The most common ones most people hear about are MK4 and MK7. MK4 comes from things like beef liver, grass-fed ghee or butter, dark meat chicken, pastured egg yolks. That's kind of, those are some great sources of MK4. MK7 comes from things like hard cheeses, fermented foods, sauerkraut, kimchi, natto, or bacterial fermentation in our guts, which is super interesting. But the big thing here is that vitamin K2 is what's really also important for bone health also. We hear a lot about just vitamin K or K1, but K2 is really important for bone health because it aids in bone mineralization by activating something called osteocalcin and matrix GLA protein. And this is going to help with obviously bone mineralization, but also preventing things like calcium from leading to or soft tissue calcification, like your kidneys, your arteries, those kinds of things. So you need vitamin K, K1, K2.
Yeah, that's really
Um,
important. I think that it worries me when people come in and say that they were told just to take these high levels of calcium without supporting with the D and the K and et cetera to help really get absorption.
exactly. Well, okay. So there are a couple other ones too. So magnesium is really
Mhm.
important. I think most people could benefit from getting
Yes,
some
I agree.
additional magnesium, even
Mhm.
through especially through supplementation too, in their diets.
Mhm.
Um, but as you start taking in more calcium, more vitamin D, your needs for magnesium increase also. So you
Mhm.
have to keep that in mind. And then also, your bones are 50% protein by volume. They're made up of amino acids. And in order to rebuild, so when you take in food, when you take in proteins and you break those proteins down into their smallest form through digestion into amino acids, in order to rebuild those amino acids into anything in your body, you have to have magnesium to do that, right? So magnesium is important for this process of rebuilding. And then vitamin C. And again, this is another nutrient a lot of people hear about for their general health, but this is also really important for bone health. The reason for that is that your bones are also they're 50% protein by volume, but they're made up of this collagen protein matrix upon which these minerals are laid. So vitamin C stimulates procollagen, it enhances collagen synthesis, and it stimulates something called alkaline phosphatase activity, which is a marker for osteoblast bone building cell formation, which is pretty cool, right? And then on the other side, it can help with preventing bone loss and reducing the risk of fractures, especially long term. Or at least if you don't have these things in your diet, your risk will increase of having these issues long term.
And they're easy ads. If you just start to think about what you're eating and really, you can even print out lists. I know you have all those resources. I provide resources to people, but you can Google what foods contain vitamin C, what foods contain K2, and just start to really think about adding those foods into your diet. Can you rotate them through and get a variety of nutrients? It's so
And
important.
my favorite ones, like for vitamin C specifically, I mean, um, you've got camu berries, you've got citrus fruits, your lemons, your limes. I mean, at least from an accessibility perspective, lemons and limes
Hmm.
and berries are some of the best things you can be incorporating. But you would always want to get those organic, right? Always get those organic if you
Yes.
possibly can, especially the berries, because otherwise you're going to be getting a lot of pesticides and stuff there. But those are some great fruit sources of vitamin C. But red and yellow bell peppers are also, or other peppers are also sources of vitamin C. Those are probably the highest vegetable sources. But the challenge is if you are somebody who has an autoimmune condition, right, or you already have a lot of gut health issues, the peppers might not be a good fit for you, right? So because they're nightshades, so you might have to pull those out. And in those situations, you would use like a lacinato kale, like a dino kale, or a lightly steamed broccoli, or some Brussels sprouts, or some fermented cabbage like sauerkraut. Those kinds of things could be really helpful additions.
Yeah, that's great. And let's move in. What I know that I love to talk about how gut health affects everything. It affects everything in our health. So it affects our bones too. So could we dive a little bit into the connection between your gut health and your bone health?
Absolutely, because there's a big connection, right?
Mhm.
So we started off by me talking about how issues with my gut health, my digestive issues, and specifically an autoimmune disease called celiac disease that damages the small intestine when you consume gluten. There's a major connection there, but even beyond that. And I always tell people to imagine their body and bones as being like plants. In order to grow, you need nutrients and the right conditions, right? So many people focus so much on the nutrients, the salads, the smoothies, the supplements, that they fail to consider the soil. And your gut is like the soil. You absorb almost everything here. So when you take in that food and you break it down into smaller pieces in your mouth and it makes its way to the stomach and it's churned in this acidic mix to break it down even further, then it makes its way to the small intestine where it's broken down into its final form to be absorbed by us, the plants, right? But in order to absorb anything, you have to have roots in your soil. And those villi are like your roots. And the job of the villi is so important that the total surface area they use to absorb nutrients is the size of a football field. Isn't that amazing? That's
It is.
inside all of us. So if you have, number one, if you have like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, if you have gut infections, if you have an autoimmune condition like celiac disease, if you have Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and all these things, you can figure all these things out through functional testing, through lab testing. You can get to the root of why you have gut issues. Those could be preventing you from absorbing these nutrients. And remember what I said, if you're not taking them in and you're not absorbing them, your body still needs nutrients to execute its daily function. So it will go to the other places and steal, especially your bones. It's the largest mineral reserve that you have in your body. So it will pull from there. The other connection to your gut is that your bones are very much living, they're living tissue. A lot of times people just think of these bones as these static things that it's your structure. It just holds you up. That's all it's good for. Well, it's actually an endocrine organ. It's living tissue. And inside it, you have something called bone marrow. It's a soft, spongy material that produces 95% of the blood cells in your body. So blood cells start out as stem cells, and they become either platelets, red blood cells, or white blood cells based on conditions in your body. So if you need help with preventing bleeding or clotting, platelets are going to help with that. If you need help with sending oxygen to the body's tissues or carrying carbon dioxide away from the tissues back to the lungs, red blood cells are going to help with that. If you need help fighting infections and healing wounds or anything related to the immune system, that's where white blood cells come in. Now, here's the connection to your gut health is that the cells that break down bone, the osteoclasts, they are a form of white blood cell. So anything that's talking to the immune system, stimulating the immune system, is speaking in the same language as the cells that break down your bones. Where does 70% of your immune system reside? In your digestive system, in your gut, right? So if you have chronic digestive issues, it's not just a matter of you're not actually absorbing your nutrients. You're stimulating the immune system that's speaking in the same language as the cells that break down your bone. So it's going to contribute to and fuel more bone loss.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think that there's so many good points here. So everyone listen up. There's so many nuggets in it. It affects it in so many different ways. But one of the things that you were saying that I think is really key that people don't understand a lot of the time is even if you are eating all the right nutrients, even if you're having your daily salad with your variety and you're eating your rainbow, if you're not absorbing it, if you're not digesting and absorbing these nutrients, they're not getting to where they need to go in your body. And this is a perfect example of that. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, let's move into a little bit of how exercise plays a role because I know there's a physical aspect also to bone health.
Oh, there's such an important one. So you could do all the things that we just talked about, right? With diet, nutrition, improve your gut health, figure out why you're losing bone. But if you don't provide your bones the stimulus they need to become stronger, they're not going to become stronger. And sometimes it may become even really hard to maintain those things also. And if you remember the standard recommendation I mentioned that most people get is just do some walking or do some weight-bearing exercise. I can tell you right now, walking is not going to be enough. So walking can help you maintain bone density, maybe in your lower half right? But it's not going to help you actually build bone strength. And what about your forearms or, any of the bones in your upper body? Are you really stimulating those or providing any kind of force when you're walking? You're not, right? So there's other types of exercise that have to be included. And there are different forms that you need to be including, or actually two different stimuli you need to include. You need muscle pulling on bone, and you need impact. And the most effective interventions for your bones use both, or either one or both of those in combination. So muscle pulling on bone, what happens is you've got a mechanical signal that sends a chemical signal to tell those bones to become stronger. And then the impact is also important. Now, if we're looking at the different types of exercise, there's weight-bearing exercise, there's non-weight-bearing exercise, and there's resistance training and muscle strengthening exercise. So let's break down each of those. For weight-bearing exercise, this is what most people are told to do. What is weight-bearing exercise? Let's just make that very clear. Weight-bearing exercise would be any kind of exercise where your body and your bones are working against gravity to keep you upright. They're things that you're doing on your feet. They're placing a good kind of healthy stress on your bones. And that's going to be like you're walking, you're jogging, you're hiking, you're dancing, you're gardening, you're playing with the kids or the grandkids outside. Or it could also be your yoga, your Pilates, your Tai Chi, your Qigong. Those kinds of things all fall into weight-bearing exercise. There's also non-weight-bearing exercise. These are things that are not, your body and your bones are not working against gravity, and they're not placing that good, healthy stress on the bones. So that would be cycling is a big one. And then also swimming. That's another big one, right? And it's not to say that if you're somebody who likes to go ride your bike with the kids down the street, or you're somebody who likes to get in the pool and swim around and do some laps, that you can't do those things. It's just, you can't count that as your only form of exercise. Same thing with people who are just runners. If you're just running every day and that's all you do, it's not enough. It's not enough. So, and this is actually, when we talk about swimming too, this is the same thing astronauts face, when they go up into space. And they don't have that healthy stress on their bones, and they can actually lose bone density if they don't work to fight against that. So now we need to know, what is the type of exercise you have to incorporate if you want to be actually building that bone strength? It's resistance training. It's muscle strengthening exercise. If you are a cardio queen, you need to make some adjustments, right? You need to make some adjustments. You need to get some muscle strengthening and resistance training in there. And the way you would do that is, this is where you would use resistance bands. Maybe you use the machines at the gym. You bring in barbells or dumbbells or something like that. And you start to incorporate exercises like squats or deadlifts or overhead presses or chin-ups. And if you want the impact there too, you would do some safe, maybe drop landings there, right? You get some impact when you jump down. All those things can be really, really helpful. And I know when you hear this, you might be like, well, that's intimidating. Either you've never done those exercises before, like deadlifts. Oh my gosh, that sounds, scary.
Yes.
But really, these are foundational movements that our bodies have just done over time. And you can get back into these movement patterns and do them correctly and do them safely and effectively to where you're actually providing the stimulus you need to build bone strength.
Yeah, and you can start slow and just build your weight as you go too. I think that you're saying it doesn't have to be intimidating. It can be light weights and do more reps, and then once you're comfortable with that, just increase the weights. And there's a lot of
Ex-
different ways you can build.
Exactly. And, if you're somebody if you're just trying to be on the side of prevention, also, like, that's great. Again, exercise in general, but especially if you already have bone loss, if you're listening to this, you have osteopenia or osteoporosis, exercise is not one of those things where it's like, give it everything you got, and, a week later you've reached your goals.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
Mhm.
And if you approach it like that, it will lead to injury. So just like Meg was saying, is that take it slow. Be patient with yourself. Give yourself time to learn new movements. You don't have to be at the highest weight right away. Get the form down first, get the body mechanics down first, and then slowly start to progress up.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kevin. You've given us so much helpful information in so many different ways. Can you tell everyone if they want to learn more about bone health, if they feel like this might be something they are already suffering, how they can reach out to you?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I would say is if you're listening to this and you know somebody that has
Mhm.
osteoporosis, share this episode with them. They need to hear this. This is really important, and especially because with how many people we've worked with, and I've seen the full spectrum of people that have no fractures to 5 to 10 or more fractures. I would just say prevention is always better than reaction. So if you know somebody that has osteoporosis, share this episode with them first. The next thing I would say is that you can always find me over at bonecoach.com. And over at bonecoach.com, we have a ton of resources for helping support, addressing bone loss and building bone strength. We got free recipes, we got amazing resources and kickstart guides, and we have Stronger Bones programs that have had over 5,000 people come through them, and have a lot of great improvements and get to the point where they need to be. So, if that sounds helpful for you, you can head over to bonecoach.com. And you can also find us on all the social channels. You can find us on Instagram at Bone Coach Kevin, and on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Pinterest at Bone Coach.
Well, thank you. And I'll link all of this in the show notes so everybody has access. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Meg.
Thank you. Okay, we did it. Let's